Hello, thank you for joining our webinar, Using Technology in Recruiting. And today we have Melissa Asher, Pam Derby, and Elizabeth Sandoval, who are all public sector recruitment experts. If you should have any questions, please put them in the Q&A or the chat. And there will be some times during this webinar that we do ask for interaction, so please leverage that chat Q&A. If you've submitted questions prior to the webinar, the presenters will address them either during the presentation or after the webinar. The recording in this PowerPoint will be available on cpshr.us, and I'll send a link to that effect, and I'll also post it on LinkedIn. So if you are not following us on LinkedIn, please do so, so that you can get a link to the presentation and our recording. And give me about 48 hours to do that post. So with that, I wanted to welcome Melissa, Pam, and Elizabeth.
All right, let's go off of mute. Makes the presentation a lot more entertaining, at least for you all. So welcome. Thank you, Jason, and thank you everyone for joining us here today. We're really excited to spend about an hour of time talking with you about using technology in recruiting. I myself have been in the HR world for over 20 years now. Started doing HR at a firm, and of course spent time there doing recruiting for that particular firm that I worked for. And then I'd say over the last, 6 or 7 years now, have been moving and doing more recruiting for clients, particularly our clients in the public sector at CPS HR Consulting, and having the great pleasure of working with a really dedicated and committed team of recruiters here at CPS. And one of those is one of our presenters today, Pam.
Hi, I'm Pam Derby. I'm the supervising executive recruiter here at CPS HR. I've been with the firm for 17 years now, all in the executive search unit, and I came from Yuba County, so I have a public sector background. And we now have done over many thousands, about 1,700, so not many thousands, but about 1,700 recruitments over those many years. So we're really looking forward to sharing some of our expertise with you today. And I'd like to introduce Elizabeth.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Elizabeth Sandoval. I've been with the organization for over 10 years. I have a wide experience with recruitment and selecting processes in the public sector. And as both Melissa and Pam stated, we're happy for you all to join us today.
Cool. All right. So that's a little bit about us, but I always like to get a little bit of a sense of our audience. So we're going to move to our next slide here, where we have a question for you. And I'd like you to use the chat or the Q&A, but chat is probably the easiest. We are interested in knowing what you are most interested in about this particular topic. So just take a minute, think about that, and put a short little answer in the chat that just gives us a sense of maybe what drew you here today, what's interesting to you about technology in recruiting, because recruiting is a big word, right? There's a lot, big concept. There's a lot kind of embedded within recruiting. There's a lot of pieces to the processes. There are a lot of parts to it. So go ahead and chat in some thoughts to us. I see online testing. Yep, so that's on the kind of the selection side. Do we have some answers coming in on QA too? Yeah. Increasing applicant pools. Yes, we're a big fan of that. Yes. Blinding personal information. Yep, we got a question ahead of time about that. So we have a spot where we'll talk a little bit about that. Different technologies. Yep, especially during COVID. New virtual platforms. Yep. A lot of the technology is really being integrated into those platforms. We're going to be talking about a couple specifically that we have quite a bit of experience with. Targeted recruitment efforts. Yeah, getting to the right audience. Oh my goodness. So important.
Lots of questions. Lots of questions.
Okay. Okay, good. Virtual platforms. Okay. Okay. Great. Great. Well, we appreciate that. It's fun to engage with you a little bit ahead of time, get a little bit of a sense of what you're interested in so that we can make sure we're trying to hit as many of those spots as we can throughout. So great. Appreciate that. So basically, you have an interest in this area. So your interest and the chart on this next slide here kind of illustrates why this topic is so important. And yes, today we're focusing more on why it's important for recruiting, but as you well know, and this slide indicates here, technology is really affecting everything that we do. I would work, but personal lives as well. What we're seeing, what has happened, and not unlike past times in history, are converging technologies which are driving new capabilities. What we're seeing, though, is that this is happening at an accelerated rate, and that you can see by the lines on the chart there that are on the right-hand side, kind of that green, that yellow, the blue, the ones that are almost going like straight up and down. What's that showing? What that's showing us and telling us is that changes around cloud computing, the Internet of Things, AI, machine learning, these technology changes are happening very rapidly, and they are driving lots of new capabilities. They're unlocking new ways of working that were previously, I would say, even unheard of, right? Whole new jobs that have been created that we didn't even know about. And kind of comparing to the older technologies, which are those flatter lines, the mainframe, even the client servers and PCs, which we all thought were revolutionary when they came out, back when I was in college and like I had my first Mac, it was like life-changing. And now it seems kind of ho-hum. And you can see that those technologies really evened out and have flattened. But we're on this upward trend here where these curved lines are almost at a straight line. And that's the world, the work world that we are living in. So what this drives on our next slide here, the result of this is that many manual or labor intensive types of tasks are now shifting to being done in some sort of an automated way. This particular chart says machine versus human, and of course, this certainly started in the manufacturing world, but is gradually and steadily creeping into pretty much everyone's work world. This particular chart comes from the World Economic Forum's 2018 Future of Jobs report, and kind of gives us a picture of the increasing number of hours, aka tasks, that are now being performed by something other than a human. So you might not even realize, just even 2 years ago, 29% of work was getting done in that way. And then 5 years from now, 52% of the work, the tasks that we're envisioning that we know of today are going to be done in a different manner and perhaps in an automated manner. So this is a huge workplace shift. And when you get a workplace shift like this, it's going to drive a shift in skills. So I'm sure you've heard reskilling, upskilling. That is the world that we're living in now, where the skills that we have now are not going to be the same skills that we need, 2, 3, 4 years from now. There is this whole kind of global reskilling going on. So I'm going to ask you a question in the chat here. So I want you to think about, you've got skills, not here yet. Back one, Jason, thank you. So in the chat related to this, so we're talking about reskilling and upskilling. So my question to you is, I want you to guess on a percentage, so 0 to 100%, what percent of your skills do you think will need to be changed? And that by that I mean, you'll replace them with different skills, you'll learn something new, you'll do something different. What percentage of your skills now in the next 2 years do you think will need to be replaced or changed in some way? So use the chat. This is a guessing game. It's like guessing the number of jelly beans in the jar. All the answers are good answers. Just have a little fun here. What do you think? What percentage of your skills?
We've got 20%, 25%, 15%, 50%, 60%, 20%,
40.
10 to 20, 39, 40. All the numbers.
Okay.
45, 15. Say the
90.
lowest
Oh,
was,
I see it. 90.
the lowest was 15. The highest has been 90.
Okay. Well, to the person who's 90, that is a change agent right there who's thinking 90%. So that's a little bit high, but according
a lot
to
of 50s.
Yeah. Well, and those people are on the right track. Everyone who's, kind of feeling or thinking it's going to be about 50%, you're really close. According to the World Economic Forum, it's going to be about 42%. So just imagine that 42% of what you know today, you will be changing and growing and learning and doing things differently. So then, Jason, where you were going on our next slide is like, how does this affect us then in recruiting, right? So we're going to talk today specifically about this kind of reskilling, this upskilling, this using technology to do recruiting differently in terms of the context that we've laid out for technology in our world. And basically here, what we're seeing is that 96% of folks believe that AI, artificial intelligence, can greatly enhance, this process, talent acquisition in general. And 14 hours of time per week are being done manually right now, tasks that could most likely be automated. So think about that, 14 hours a week in tasks that are really very manual, very transactional, very repetitious. Happening. So the thought here is that a lot of those tasks can be automated, and that might be through something that's sophisticated like, artificial intelligence. It could be like some of you, when we asked you what your interests were, it could very well be done through your ATS, through your applicant tracking system, through a platform that you're using. And we're going to be talking about those different mediums, because what we're seeing is that the areas that recruiting is being most impacted, and we think in a positive way with technology, is in the sourcing and the screening, the matching, and then we're going to also add in our own thoughts here on the candidate experience piece. So this is what's happening. This is what's changing in our recruiting world. So if we take this example of 14 hours and give you a bit of a business case on our next slide, let's talk about, the business side of this, the ROI, right? So we have the capability, right? The technology's here. We're starting to use it. What's the cost and what's the savings basically of moving in this direction? What makes it worth it? Right, from a business standpoint. So if we take those 14 hours a week that we're doing manual tasks on, that's about 728 hours per year. That's, pretty sizable when you add that up. And if you kind of apply kind of an average, $38 to $40 an hour cost of, let's say, a recruiter, you're looking at probably 30,000 plus in savings. But what we think is even more important than just the savings is what those folks can then be focusing on, which will save you time as you continue doing your recruiting efforts, because the quality of the hire, I think, is even more important. When you automate those top of the funnel, we've got the little funnel there. Recruiting is often thought of as a funnel. You've cast a wide net, got a lot of people on the top of the funnel, and you narrow them down as you screen them to get to those ideal candidates. If you can automate those tasks at the top of the funnel, things like the skill assessments and the testing and the MQ screening, then your recruiters can really spend time on those more relationship building types of tasks to develop not only and get your current candidate you're looking for, but to create that pipeline. So the next time you have to recruit, it's easier because people are already waiting. They're waiting to hear about your opening. They're waiting to join your organization because your recruiters have built this brand. Your recruiters have built this relationship with people to let them know what a great organization it is to work for. So that would now save time throughout the entire process. So we wanted to give you just a little bit of that ROI, a little bit of the business case, because we always have to keep that in mind too. This is why it's worth it to spend a little bit more time thinking about and figuring out how you might use more technology in your process. So I think Pam is going to now take us into some of the specifics here. Pam, I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Good morning. Thank you, Melissa. So we're going to be talking about 3 main areas today where we think that technology can be used and that it can, as Melissa said, increase your ROI. First, we're going to be talking about applicant tracking systems, and then scheduling and screening and how those can be done with technology. But also we wanted to touch on candidate experience today, because as Melissa was talking about having that pipeline, if people don't have a good experience with the technology, we did receive a question today about, I keep applying and I'm getting tossed out to a third party, it seems like, how can those things change so that people have had a good experience and they still want to apply with your company? And so on the next slide, I have a question for you. So how many of you are currently using some type of applicant tracking system?
Just give us a yes or a no, I think makes it easy.
Right.
Yeah, we are.
Cool. Yes. Right.
Jason, if you want to move to the question slide, that'd be great. Oh, look at that.
Overwhelmingly,
Many
yes.
of you. This is great.
Oh, cool. Tracy, NeoGov. Woohoo! We're going to be talking about that. This is not an advertisement, though. Job apps. Okay, cool.
Probably about 80%, I would say, yeses.
Okay, that's great.
That's great. So Ellie's going to be sharing more detailed information regarding applicant tracking systems, but as we all know, and Melissa's already touched on, applicant tracking without a system can be a really long and arduous process if you're not using technology. As manually, we've said 14 hours it can take. So, but from our perspective on the executive recruitment side, well, applicant tracking can also do a lot of other things like automating social sharing, managing email templates, monitoring social media activity. In the executive recruitment team, we really appreciate how quickly it can identify those potential passive candidates who might be an ideal match for a position. And it can accomplish all of that in real time. So that can give us a comprehensive view of the talent pipeline we're already looking at before we start researching to look for new candidates. And so it has many uses besides just people being able to apply and then, be notified throughout the process, hopefully, of what's happening. But I'm glad to see NeoGov and Ellie is going to talk now about some more specifics.
Great, thank you, Pam. So in my next slide, you'll kind of see, so applicant tracking systems. So I know it looks like the majority of you folks are using some type of applicant tracking system in your day-to-day recruitment processes that you do, but did you know there's over 193 different types of applicant tracking systems out there, and they all do different types of functionalities, but they're all targeted to assist with the online functions of the recruitment process. Now, with so many applicant tracking systems out there, this helps a recruiter continuously streamline recruitment processes, whether it's in the way you're screening applications, in the way you're scheduling candidates. But in addition to that, you're also allowing your company to easily narrow down applicant pools. You're saving recruiter time, as Melissa previously mentioned. You're saving the company money because now the recruiter is spending that time that maybe in the past they spent reviewing applications, doing other functions that are involved in the recruitment process. And you're also changing the candidate experience. So maybe it was a harder process in the past for somebody to apply for a particular position or submit an application. Now that process is becoming more streamlined and making it easier for candidates to use online platforms to apply for positions, to find out statuses about a current recruitment and things associated with the positions that they're applying for. In addition to applicant tracking systems, we are seeing an abundance of scheduling software that's becoming available, and it's very valuable in the recruitment world because this software is helping HR professionals do the scoring outside of their ATS systems, all virtually online. You're able to do your scheduling online as well. And in some cases, you're able to integrate the scheduling software with your current applicant tracking systems. So that's a dual functionality now that's allowing you to further streamline those processes that you have in-house. In my next slide here, we'll talk about a couple of the examples. So NeoGov, it looks like a few of you folks online are using NeoGov, but are you using the auto scoring for the MQ review process? And what I mean with auto scoring is you're basically setting up a step in NeoGov. Again, this is not advertisement for NeoGov, just our experience with the system. But you're setting up a process in the system to accept the applications, and then they get a rated score based on particular responses to the questions that you've listed in the system. So it can be things like how many years of experience they have, what type of degree they have, and types of certifications that they hold. And for each question that they respond to, they get a numerical response. And that allows the system to either pass or fail the candidates. And in that way, you're able to streamline that minimum qualification review process and send those applications for the candidates that pass forward to either the HR recruiter or the hiring manager for further review. They also have the SME review process. And I think we had a question about the blind review step here. You are able to omit information in NeoGov in terms of what a subject matter expert or a reviewer sees. In some cases, you would omit all the demographic information in terms of the candidate name, candidate contact information, and the raters have that functionality to just review either what the candidate has submitted on the application in terms of their experience or the responses that they provide to the supplemental questions that you've listed on the application. And we have used both of these features multiple times with various clients, and this has helped streamline processes when reviewing applications for positions that we're recruiting for. Rivs is an interview streaming software. I kind of spoke a little bit in terms of scheduling software. This is something that we're familiar with using for our clients. The system has multiple functionalities in terms of either doing your oral exam process online, and we will talk a little bit about that later in today's presentation, as well as doing all the scoring pieces of your interview online. We recently used it for self-scheduling. We had an event where we scheduled over 200 candidates for a hiring event, and we were able to send them their notification using this online platform and allow them the flexibility to determine what worked best for their schedules and then sign up for an available time slot or interview time slot. And with that, Pam is going to proceed with talking a little bit about considerations.
Thank you, Ellie. So obviously nothing is 100%. And there have been studies that have shown that there are a couple of ways that people have learned to trick the system. And as I'm sure you've all experienced, many times you're looking for a candidate who may have attributes that really aren't included in your job description. And so if you're using your ATS to do your pre-screen of applicants, most likely it's been programmed with keywords from that job description. And so as I mentioned, studies have shown that now there are some candidates who've learned how to trick the system, and so they've learned to include keywords into their resume, which then will prompt it to recognize them as a potential candidate, while then there may be, terrific candidates who don't understand that workaround, and they could miss their chance because, they've explained themselves differently than what the system has been programmed to recognize. And they could be the exact type of candidate that you're seeking. And so that really folds also into looking for bias and discrimination. Obviously, this is something that, we've been looking at, maybe even 20 years back, but certainly, it started with standardized testing, across the board in education. But your ATS is based on human input and typically, as I mentioned, usually that job description. And there can be bias related to, demographics, age, ethnicity, language. And this is especially more likely if you're using job descriptions that haven't been updated in many years. Certainly in today's environment where we're looking at diversity and inclusion and equity, it's really important that we keep looking at those job descriptions and make sure that they don't reflect any bias. There are some technologies out there that will take a look that you can put in your wording and it will look for bias for you. An example of that one is called Textio, and it is looking for bias words in your language. So those are some of the things that you can use to really help out. We did receive a question about attracting diverse candidates and where should you post? Are any of those places free? In executive recruitment, obviously there are many organizations that are geared towards different cultural groups, different genders specifically. And so we typically use many of those job boards. There are some that are across the board. Diversity.com is one that is, usually is about $50, I believe. And obviously, when we're working for a client, they're paying for that advertising for an executive position, whereas you may be advertising for administrative assistants and you don't have a budget, and especially now, you may not have the budget to pay for those types of ads. But it does make a big difference if you can hit those boards that really relate to diversity. And there are many out there. And certainly, we're always happy to talk to you after these webinars to give you some examples as well. And now I'm going to talk about our next portion, which is scheduling and screening. So in scheduling and screening, we're going to talk about, there are some things that you can do, as Ellie mentioned, that are within your ATS. There are other programs for scheduling that are strictly about scheduling. And so Jason, if you could show that to that next slide on scheduling. Thank you. So one of the things that I've been using recently is called Calendly, and it is strictly about scheduling. It's very user friendly. It allows for the attendees to schedule their own time frames. And unlike Melissa, when I was in college, I couldn't buy a Mac. I was still typing papers on, really thought I was great that I had an electric typewriter. And so for me, I was not one of those individuals who grew up with technology. And I was able to download this, do it myself, and it has given me a lot of time to be able to send one email. I go in and indicate for screening interviews, for example, I go in and indicate these are the blocks of time that I have. And then I send one mass email that goes to each individual that I want to screen, and they're able to go in and schedule their own interview. And that really has saved us on time. The other thing that is saved is making sure that we've gotten everyone scheduled. Sometimes you may have 20 people that you want to interview. And if you've emailed all of those people or called them and you've missed somebody on your list when you're tracking who has responded, it can be easy to miss that someone is not scheduled an interview. And I have found using this scheduling system, that has helped tremendously. There are many systems with this functionality: Appointment Plus, Acuity Scheduling, Schedulicity. There's many more. But we have found that this helps in many ways. The other thing I've used it for is scheduling reference sources and doing references. I've sent it to the reference sources so that they can schedule their own times. I've used it in doing community engagement in a recruitment where I went someplace so that the community could come in and speak with me about a position. And the link was sent in a flyer to individuals in the community so that they could schedule themselves. And so this is something, we all know that just scheduling can take so much time. And there are many, many uses for this type of scheduling that will assist you and make things quicker. And Ellie is now going to talk about some of those types and some things more in depth.
Great. Thank you, Pam. All right, Jason, next slide. All right, perfect. So in my particular unit, we do use the RIV systems for our oral exams and hiring interviews. The system has great functionalities, the first one being the self-scheduling feature, where we're able to send a group of folks an email with a link letting them know, please go ahead and sign up for specific available time slots for an interview. I think I stated this before, but we had a current client where we sent over 200 invitations and allowed all those folks to self-schedule themselves for the available time slots. For hiring interviews, we've also used the auto scheduling feature where we basically send them a link with their date and time. The only difference, because this is an online platform, we're not having folks convene in one room or a location. We're actually have them all participate online. So with that auto scheduling feature, they receive their date, they receive their time, but they all participate via the online platform of RIVs. And then we have also used the scoring feature option where during either a live interview or a pre-recorded session, we have our subject matter experts or our panel members score the candidates based on the responses they're providing, and they're able to do that all within the system. They can also do their norming, change scores, add all their notes, and it's something that we're continuously doing for the projects that we work on. And then the system also has a full array of reports in terms of pulling either schedules, statistical reports like questions, and information. So when we've provided reports to our clients, we're able to show them, okay, here's how all your candidates are performing in this particular exam or this classification. Here's where we're seeing things that need to change. And then just additional features during the exam process for the self-scheduling option, candidates are able to go back into the system and reschedule themselves as long as it's within the allotted window that we provide them. So we have that flexibility in the system, and it allows the recruiter some leeway. So instead of spending that back and forth communication with that candidate to reschedule them across the board, the candidate is able to do that on their own as long as it's within the allotted time.
24/7 access too.
Yes.
So everybody, well, most everybody likes that.
Yes, thank you. Mostly everybody enjoys that. And this kind of is perfect segue here for our next slide, the interviewing process. I'm going to touch a bit on that. So as we know, with COVID hitting, that kind of made us all kind of, react. How are we going to change the interviewing process? What can we do to continue to move forward in our recruitment process, but of course, adhering to all the new guidelines and regulations that are out there for us. So in our next slide here, what we've been doing is online interviewing. So what we've learned, like everybody knows, technology is the gateway of the future of recruiting. So in today's world, like I said, we've all had to learn to adapt with all the changes that have been coming at us from all different types of ways. So being able to use this online platform has changed not only the way we're running the recruitments in terms of scheduling candidates or administering or scoring actual oral exams, or even administering or holding hiring interviews, but it's also changed the candidate experience. So in the past, maybe a candidate received a letter with their notice, and then there was that back and forth communication with the hiring department or the hiring representative to try to adjust their interviews based on their schedules. Now they can do it all virtually, all online, and all the information is there accessible to them, like Melissa stated, 247. So it's, again, easier for both the recruiter, easier both for the candidate. And we think that this is something that's here to stay. Just in general, everybody enjoys having that flexibility to be able to do that. It's also allowing us to get panels together where panelists can be in multiple different areas and a candidate in a different area. So now panelists aren't spending time trying to coordinate their schedules to leave their office to go to a specific location to administer maybe 2 to 3 days of exams. They can do it directly from their office. Same thing with candidates. They're not having to move around schedules or finding ways to attend those exams in person. But also, with that being said, there are some disadvantages, and I wouldn't necessarily call them disadvantages, just some things you want to consider with technology. As always, Wi-Fi, that's a big factor in there. Wi-Fi, though, it's very reliable. In some cases, you have random drops, or people may not understand how to use an online platform, or they may have difficulty joining the online platform. That's other things you should take into consideration when you're looking at conducting online interviewing. Or if someone has no way of joining the platform, maybe they don't have a smartphone or a computer, just things to keep in mind. And then in our next slides, we're going to be talking about the differences between the two-way live and the one-way pre-recorded interviews.
Thanks, Ellie. So I'm going to provide an example of a two-way interview. I have to say that you couldn't have told me in January that we would be able to complete 2 city manager searches, and I've just completed a police chief search completely virtually. Before we got to COVID, and I'm sure you're all experiencing the same thing, that's not something we would have considered. We were certainly using Skype interviews and things maybe for a first round, but we were not using them as a final interview process. And so there are many different platforms you can use, as Ellie mentioned. I have been using Zoom because it allows me to have multiple panels open. It cuts down on time because it's much easier to schedule multiple panels at one time because you have many people. Last week, for the police chief recruitment, I had 3 computers going with 3 different Zoom meetings going, so that we were running 3 candidates at a time through 3 multiple interview panels, and we're able to get through all of that in about a 6-hour period. And so one of the things, though, that I would caution you about is, as Ellie mentioned, Wi-Fi is a problem. We did get through that day. We interviewed 6 candidates. We had 3 panels, and we had one issue that one candidate broke up just a bit. But I would always schedule a test with candidates previous to the day before, a couple of days before. When we're scheduling them, we always schedule a test so that we can see how their Wi-Fi is working. Can they get into the system? I think one of the things that we have found about using Zoom is that you need to have a waiting room, obviously. That's very important when you're doing interviews. One of the things about Teams that we use at CPS for doing interviews, you can't have a waiting room. And so then candidates, we have had an issue with a candidate coming into a room when another candidate was interviewing. So those are the types of things that you need to be aware of. So I always schedule a test, and you need to let people know, obviously, the scheduling piece, as we've talked about, you want to be scheduling hopefully a week ahead of time so that people have the opportunity to find out if they need to download the platform, whatever the case may be. You want to give them a lot of leeway. The other thing is that the test is really important so that you can see how they are visually set up. You want to make sure to give them some tips about right now you're too dark, or you need to move your camera closer, or I did have an interview a couple of weeks ago with the candidate had told me no, she didn't need to test. And then her view with the panel, she was very dark, and it was a little off-putting to them, and so those are all the things to look for. Obviously, people still believe that, I can't see body language, but I think we're all getting used to this in this current environment. I see people becoming much more comfortable. And as I mentioned, we've finished, very difficult recruitments where we had multiple panels, and that, they went seamlessly. And I think that our clients have been, very happily surprised as well. And so I think we've learned a new way to do things that we didn't think could have happened before. And
I love the suggestion Michelle says here, have a candidate drop examples of their work into the chat. That's a great idea, Michelle. Thank you for sharing that.
Yes, that's terrific. And so then Ellie was going to talk about one-way interviews.
Mm-hmm. So on the next slide, you'll see here one-way interviews. So if you're not familiar with those are pre-recorded interviews. So kind of inviting the candidate, go ahead and attend, join this link. They go through the process of reviewing the questions, recording themselves, responding to the questions, and then submitting it to their particular person that they're applying, or the company that they're applying for, which in turn gives those recruiters the opportunity to come back later and review the recordings and do the scoring piece of it in terms of reviewing the candidate responses online and giving them scores. They can also convene with a panel or subject matter experts, and each of them can give them individual scores at a later time, or when they predetermine that information and when they want to do that. And this just helps with the recruiting streamlining the process, so that if for some reason you don't have that opportunity to convene your panel right away to do two-way live interviews or in-person interviews, you have that opportunity of allowing the candidate to record their responses to the questions, and then you as an HR recruiter going back and re-reviewing that information. So it gives you more of a flexibility, more of a leeway there to streamline that process.
Okay, so I think we're ready for candidate experience. And Jason, move us ahead. One more, please. We think it's really important to spend some time on this particular area for recruiting. It's super important. We've already kind of alluded to the fact that a lot of the ATSs have notifications built into them. If you're not using those notifications, you need to understand them and get them programmed. The number one request from job seekers is more communication. And this is where technology can really help you automate that. So here's a couple of the stats that we found. 58% say they have had a negative impression if they don't hear back after submitting an application, right? It just sets a bad tone, right? It does not send the right message. On the other hand, 67% have a positive impression if they receive consistent updates throughout the process. So maybe even if they aren't selected, they don't get that job, they have a positive impression of your organization. And that speaks to that pipeline that you want to be building, that branding piece. That is where you and your recruiters want to be spending your time. So it's definitely worth to invest some effort into creating a great candidate experience. And technology will help you automate that and help you have that consistent professional communication. In fact, there are already a lot of apps built for that. So Jason, reveal here our next slide. Yes, chatbot. Chances are you are already interacting with these types of applications, perhaps in some kind of retail environment. A lot of websites now have that little message that pops up and asks if you need help. That, in fact, is a chatbot. So that same technology, which is usually kind of a plug-in technology, can be employed for you to really improve that candidate experience. Industry estimates that chatbots can automate up to 80% of that top of that funnel communications. Sometimes they're called conversational agents. It's really just a software application that is designed to mimic human conversational abilities. I mean, think about Alexa and Siri and Google Now. It's like that. And they're using machine learning. There's some kind of different types. We'll talk a little bit about that, but using AI technology like natural language processing allows these chatbots to understand a person's message, kind of understand what they're asking, and then how to respond. So we're seeing people integrate this through email, through their ATSs, maybe through their social media, even like Facebook. So our next slide here talks a little bit about the specifics of what you can do with a recruiting chat box. You know, some things that seem pretty maybe evident here. I mean, you can use them to collect some standard information from the candidate, such as their resume and, you know, basic contact information. You can use them to ask some initial screening questions about just years of experience, about knowledge, about certifications, about education, some of those basic things. You can use them to start ranking candidates on certain metrics that you've programmed in, right? So qualifications, again, a lot of times this is going to be around experience. They can be used and are probably most widely used for FAQs about the job, right? What's the salary? What are the benefits? When does it start? You know, what is the link to the strategic plan? I mean, a chat bot can take care of a lot of those types of things and seem more personal than me just having to find it on a website. Also, chatbots are being used to schedule appointments. So it's the same thing, that kind of scheduler that Pam shared, Calendly, but now you add a chatbot to that and it kind of feels like it's a little bit more of a personal experience, even though the whole thing is really happening behind the scenes through automated processes. So it's important to know that this technology is out there. This doesn't replace the human touch, but what we're trying to do is take some of these really more routine, more types of tasks that need to be done across the board and are very done consistently across the board, and try to automate those to save you that time. On our next slide, I'm just going to touch on this because we can't take a deep dive here on this today, but there's chatbots kind of fall into two camps. One that is more based on rules, so that's a little bit more limiting. So more like the FAQs, where it's a little bit more prescribed in what you're putting in as far as the Q&A and what can be asked. The other, which we're seeing a rise in, of course, are the ones that are based on machine learning, which has the ability to actually kind of learn and grow. So as applicants ask questions that maybe the chatbot doesn't know, there's somebody who's alerted, that answer is plugged in, and now the chatbot knows how to answer that one going forward. So it can get very sophisticated here, but you can start with a simple FAQ chatbot. And I got a couple examples for you to share on this next slide. One that's been in use for quite some time now is actually with the Army. The Army created a chatbot called Sergeant Star, and he was designed to answer the FAQs, things about the basic training, the types of jobs available, salaries. Candidates could send a message to Sergeant Star, and if he knew how to answer, they'd get an immediate answer. Or if not, again, an alert, someone would intervene and Sergeant Star would then learn the answer to that question going forward. So this particular app, this chatbot, has fielded like 11 million questions, which is kind of the equivalent, the Army thinks, of about 55 recruiters. So obviously they're doing a lot of recruiting. Georgia State, another app, not maybe exactly for recruiting or recruiting the way we think about it. They're trying to recruit new students. So they've used their chatbot the same way. It's called Pounce, using text messaging. Newly admitted students can ask questions. They can receive reminders. They can respond to surveys. So it's just a really great way for that candidate to feel invested in that process and to feel like they can get the information they need, and they're, the organization wants to engage with them. So just a couple of examples we wanted to share with you there. And I think we're going to transition now to, oh, that's right, Pam.
Thank you, Melissa. So as Melissa mentioned, the chatbot that was, we certainly see that the future is heading to AI. And as you can see on this slide, 76% of recruiters that were surveyed indicated that they thought that AI's impact was going to have at least somewhat of a significant impact on going forward in recruiting. It certainly can be a time saver. Hiring managers, it's estimated that they spend an average of 13 hours weekly on screening candidates for just one role. 70% of that same survey's respondents agreed that productivity could be increased by automating the screening process. And while ATS software can help improve those numbers, it still requires manual data inputs and filters, which means that recruiters still have to, need to source for candidates themselves and refer to hiring managers for advice, et cetera. So while it does save time, you still have that situation. So with AI, it has the potential, as Melissa mentioned about the chatbot, to learn the type of talents that your organization needs and look for them automatically from the applications that you're using. Its machine learning ability allows it to learn and get more proficient as it repeatedly does a task. Plus, it can be programmed to be legally compliant and non-discriminatory, which we spoke about previously with the ATS systems. So hopefully it avoids bias related to demographics. One example of an AI candidate is when IBM did this about 7 years ago. So it's been quite some time, where the company claimed that it managed to reallocate 80% of staff in a business arm that had been forced to close down. So that's, we're definitely moving. We're also into AI. We're obviously already using it. But I think with this next slide, we can show that, there could be some issues. And it's not a panacea. Obviously, one of the things it can't do is decide that whether someone, is tenacious or they're resilient or they're good at working on a team. And, let's face it, when we're doing interviews, maybe we can't even do that as a human, but it's really impossible to qualify some of those things by monitoring the tone of someone's voice or their facial expression over a few minutes of video and audio. And that is how AI at this point would work, is that someone would maybe do a pre-recorded interview and then the AI would go through that and determine some of those things. But if that can happen and we live in a world where those things can be determined, maybe it's going to work someday, but it's still a ways off. So it's not a panacea. And we're probably still going to have to do some things manually, because there are some things about humans that, a machine just may not be able to tackle. But it certainly is interesting in the ways that it's going to be able to save us time, the learning potential, some of the things we've already talked about. It's already being employed in many of the things we use. So there's probably going to be a lot more learning about this, obviously, over the next few years. But it's certainly where we're headed right now. And with that, Ellie, ask you a question.
Thank you. That's a perfect segue here. So everybody, what skills do you think are important for a recruiter? If you guys could start using the chat to just type in your responses.
Yeah, we're going to round out the presentation today on this topic. So we've been talking about technology, of course, as a skill set, so that's a great one. But what other skills do you think are important for a recruiter? Consistency, friendliness, yes. Good communication skills. Oh yeah, a lot of people on that same page. Consistency. Customer service.
That's a big one.
That's a big one. Organizational skills, I see. Yes. Ooh, marketing. Somebody peeked ahead.
Yes, somebody did.
Flexibility, networking.
Oh.
Cool. Okay, so these are superheroes is what you're saying. They have all these amazing skills.
So in our next slide, we're going to kind of touch on 3 that we have here. So first one being tech savvy, of course. Want to make sure that everybody's comfortable with technology, constant changing, and getting familiar with new technology and being ready to use that for your recruitments. People focus, Pam mentioned this a little bit. Technology is great, but technology can't do everything. You still need those people with this particular skill set for recruitments and recruitment processes. And then marketing, focusing on your targeted audience and branding. In my next slide here, touching a bit about tech savvy. So we want those digital adopters. So, and all that really is just an attitude. So someone who's willing to open to quickly learning about all the technologies and platforms that are available out there for us to use for recruitments. So this can include things like LinkedIn and Twitter, applicant tracking systems, sourcing platforms, the full array of technology and those platforms that are available out there for all of us to use. So we need teams to be comfortable with using the technology. We need them to be open with implementing new ways how to reach out to folks, how to connect, how to source, how to manage and communicate with candidates and other team members, and even with their clients. So you need to be open to all that flexibility, all that technology that's coming your way. And then it also has to be data driven. So we need to be collecting and using the data that we find to make those better hiring decisions. So analytics, so where are you finding your best candidates? Which platforms are providing you more leads and results to help nurture that particular talent pool that you're striving to get? And then Melissa's going to talk a bit about the people focus.
People, yes, people are at the heart of this here, candidates and recruiters as well. A recent survey that we found said that while 91% of job seekers believe technology has made the job search process more effective, 87% also believe it's made the job search process more impersonal. And that's what we don't want. We really want the recruiter to be able to maintain and cultivate that focus on the human being, the human touch. It's really important. So those social skills are going to be more important than ever. Of course, those are things like empathy, right? Really wanting to get to know your candidate, getting to know the hiring manager, really understanding what it is that they need, like developing more of that relationship with the hiring manager. So that's going to be things like really listening, and asking really good questions around what type of a person do you need? What do they need to be doing? Because that gives you that ideal candidate. That gives you that holistic picture that you need as a recruiter to then apply that to the candidate pool, to apply it to these conversations now, these interactions you're going to be able to have with the candidates, because you have more time getting to know them and really understanding what their skill sets are, and then matching those with the needs within your departments or across your agencies. So we really hope that saving time on those manual processes allows the recruiter to really embrace and lean into the more people-focused social skills and relationship building skills. Critical. And then Pam's going to talk about our last one here.
So marketing, the global head of employment and branding and sourcing at SAP noted in a talk that recruitment is marketing. And if you're a recruiter nowadays and you don't see yourself as a marketer, you're in the wrong profession. And I completely agree with that. I have seen over the last 17 years, we have grown exponentially in our creativity, which really starts with the marketing materials. We're now using a flipbook format for our recruitment brochures that's easily read for people on their, we're looking at mobile devices. People are electronically tethered 24/7, as we said, and it's a great way for people to be able to look at that. It also, we can use more text and not in a small font, as we did with the old 4-page, because we were thinking about printing that all the time. It's certainly more green to do it that way. And it is more visually appealing. We've been rewriting job postings and trying to use more creative language, you know, thinking about things that are going to attract candidates. What are the things that we need to do to make this position, you know, attractive to someone? Innovative places for sourcing and marketing campaigns. A good example is we have done a lot of rural recruiting for mountainous areas where it's difficult to attract people. And we did Facebook postings to places for mountain bikers and for fishermen because, you know, or fisher people, because those are things that were, you know, people were drawn to that area for. And we were able to attract a great candidate, but it was because they wanted to come live there. And so we're looking all the time at new social platforms. We are using LinkedIn extensively. Some of our recruiters are using Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, some. We haven't gone into that in the government sector. We haven't seen that as much. But we're still always looking for the best next way to make sure that we get a position out there and that people see it as attractive. And the other thing is branding, and which is about cohesive storytelling. And I'm sure that many of your organizations are seeing that today, that they're talking about branding. And with Glassdoor, the reality is that people can go to Glassdoor and, you know, 2 people have said you're a horrible organization, and that's out there, you know, in the cyber world forever. And so we really talk to clients about making sure that you have a brand that stands out to people. Why are the reasons that somebody wants to come to work for you? I'm using a section like that in all of my recruitment brochures these days. Why would you want to come work here? And have 6 or 7 bullet points about what are the great things about your organization. We've been using video to great effect. For the police chief search I just mentioned, the HR person with her iPhone did a 2-minute video with the city manager and talking about why do you want to come be the police chief in my town? And we posted it to LinkedIn with our ad. And so there are so many different ways that you can market and brand, even in the government sector. And I think we're seeing those used to great effect, certainly in executive search at this time. And thanks.
So great.
Move on.
Great skills, right? So they've evolved a little bit over time. So right here, Jason, just a quick recap. So what we hope you've gotten out of this today is an understanding of the importance of technology, specifically the technology in recruiting. We tried to give you some things to build that business case if you're needing to make that case to adopt more of it within your agency. We explored several different areas where there's a lot going on already using technology, screening, sourcing, scheduling, interviewing, and the candidate experience. So if you're going to start down that road, pick one of those paths. You cannot go wrong. And there are a lot of pieces and parts out there that you can plug in to your platform, since 8% of you have an ATS, or might be something that you just need to turn on. Lastly, we just wanted to give you a glimpse of the recruiter skill set. So on behalf of Pam, Ellie, and myself, thank you so much for attending today. We hope you got some great nuggets. And Pam, Ellie, and Jason, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure working with you on this presentation today.
Thank you. And Michelle, I see you posted a couple of great questions. If you want to email me at pderby@cpshr.us, so I have your email information, I can provide you with some more background about those situations. So, but thank you very much.
Thank you guys for presenting. We appreciate your knowledge and experience. For anybody that is interested in getting the slides or video, we will post it on our website as well as on LinkedIn. So please connect with us. If you do have any questions about the material that was presented or need any help in any way, when you exit this particular webinar, there will be a survey. You can just put any notes in there, or you can connect with Elizabeth, Pam, or Melissa on LinkedIn or via email. So thank you everybody for attending, and we'll look forward to having everyone at the next HR webinar next month.